A really interesting topic today, something I love to talk about, Grail watches. This came up with a bunch of my friends who were talking about watches. Mark Zuckerberg came up and his recent purchases that he's made of some very high-end watches. He recently got into watches very rapidly. He was recently spotted at a wedding speaking to his friend, the person who was actually getting married, a very rich Indian businessman by the name of Anand Ambani. And when he was talking to him, he was admiring his Richard Mille. He had a Richard Mille on his wrist and Mark was admiring it. They're saying that's where he sort of got into watches. It was sparked at that moment, and now he is all of a sudden into watches. And over the past few months, he's acquired 5 watches that are pretty insane. Grail-worthy watches, of course, because he is a multi-billionaire. So for this video, we're going to imagine that we are some of the richest people in the world. You and me, we are the richest people in the world, or some of the richest people in the world. There are people out there like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett. Now, if you're not familiar, Bill Gates wears a Casio. He doesn't really care about watches. And Warren Buffett really doesn't care about watches all that much either. He has one good watch. He wears it all the time, and that is a Rolex Day-Date. It's a president's, it's gold, but it's nothing too crazy considering that he's worth billions of dollars. Also, up until recently, Mark Zuckerberg was usually seen wearing no watch, or maybe a smartwatch. He's worth about $202 billion. However, Mark now has decided that he likes watches and he has jumped in with both feet. First, he was spotted wearing a Patek Philippe, a reference 5236, which is a perpetual calendar in gold. And as a first watch, when you decide to start collecting, you're starting out with one of the ultimate grails. It's pretty incredible. But of course, again, he does have $202 billion. So this is just a drop in the bucket. And then basically over the last month, things have really escalated. He's gotten 2 FP Journes. One of them is one of the sport aluminum versions. I'm not a huge fan of those. Those sort of look like Swatch watches to me a little bit, and they also don't feel all that expensive in hand. However, they are very, very nice watches, and their movements are beautiful, but like I said, I'm not a huge fan of those. And then he bought another FP Journe. That was a chronometer Sovereign, I believe it's called, Havana in platinum, which is a beautiful watch as well. I'm not the biggest fan of FP Journe. I've probably mentioned that here on my channel. I think they are a little bit overhyped. They're still one of those brands that are still way overpriced and very, very hard to get for basically no reason, in my opinion. And then he bought a very weird watch. It's a JLC. I'm not sure why he bought this. Maybe he went into a location, into an AD. He saw this watch and fell in love with it. It's a Kingsman knife watch. This is a watch that was made in a very limited edition for the movie The Kingsman, which is kind of funny, but this is actually a really good looking watch. It's an ultra thin in gold. It has its crown at the 12 o'clock position, so I believe you would call this a unicorn. And then it has a little crown guard on it. It's a little piece of gold that sits above the crown. It looks really good. Again, a very strange watch. I'm not sure how he actually picked this, and it kind of doesn't fit in with his other watches. But hey, either way, to each his own. I definitely think he's doing his own thing, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Last but not least, he bought a De Bethune. This is the DB25, the Starry Night. Really a beautiful watch. I love De Bethune. They make some very creative watches. Some inspiration from Star Trek, which is, again, something I really love. So I do love De Bethune, and I really love this watch. I really love that Mark didn't go the normal route of people who have money and just start collecting watches and immediately go out and buy the standard rich guy watches, the Daytona in solid gold or whatever it might be, and then go buy an AP Royal Oak and things like that. I'm happy that he went out and bought some things that are really kind of off the beaten path. A lot of people wouldn't know they were expensive. In fact, most people don't know that these are really expensive, really cool watches. It's really all the watch geeks out there that are sort of going crazy over his choices. Okay, so with that being said, I'm going to list some of my Grail watches. I actually own a few of my Grail watches. One of those is my 50 Fathoms, but I have a long list of Grail watches. In fact, this list, I have a list here that I'm holding in my hand. This is not an exhaustive list of my Grail watches, but I'm going to go through a few of them and give you a couple of reasons why I think they're awesome And that's it. And then down in the comments, I want to hear what you guys think about my list, but I also want to hear some of your Grail watches. What would you choose if you were all of a sudden a multi-billionaire and you decided you like watches? I'd like to hear what you would do. So put a list of 5 watches down in the comment section. I want to hear what you would buy with all that money. So a few of these watches immediately came to mind. One of those was the Seiko Spacewalk. This is a watch that not many people know about. It's a spring drive. It's wildly overpriced, and they sell on the secondary market for around $75,000 for no real good reason. But these are awesome looking watches. I love the Spacewalk, and I really wish they would come out with an affordable version. I know they came out with a Seiko 5 version that looked incredibly cheap. These look expensive, even though they're just a standard, really standard spring drive chronograph. They are basically the same movement that you can get in other spring drive chronographs from Grand Seiko, but I just don't know. I love this watch. It's so limited. No one knows what it is. I just think it's a really cool watch, and I would love to have one of those in my collection. If I was a billionaire, this would probably be one of the first watches I would buy. The next 2 watches were a no-brainer. I immediately wrote these down on this piece of paper because I knew I would want to have these in my collection. One is a very limited watch. It is the Vacheron Overseas Everest Dual Time. I love this watch. These sold out immediately when they were released. They were a very limited edition, and now they are selling for around $80,000 on the secondary market. You can see a little bit of a trend here. These are very, very expensive watches, not very well known, and I really love this watch. I think it's a really great looking watch. The colors and everything that they did here, it looks really good, but it doesn't really warrant the price tag. So you can get a dual time from Vacheron for around, I think they're around $20,000. This is going for around $80,000. I think they originally sold for around $30-something thousand for basically no reason. So, you know, it's something I would probably never save up to buy, but I would definitely buy it if I was a multi-billionaire. It would make no sense not to have it. So definitely on this list. The next watch, another Vacheron, is the 222, a solid gold watch. It's definitely a rich guy's watch, but it's also really elegant. I think it's so much more elegant than a Nautilus, the Royal Oak. It does not compare to the 222. The 222 is a beautiful watch, and I think the design is better than Genta's designs, in my opinion. It's such a gorgeous watch, and it's a Grail watch of mine. I think they go for around $65,000. You can get them directly from Vacheron, but again, you have to have a relationship with Vacheron. I've bought all of my Vacherons in the secondary market, so there you go. I don't have a relationship with Vacheron, and I'm not prepared to spend $65,000 on anything, so again, only if I were a billionaire. The next few watches are watches that I probably would buy and never use, so I know that doesn't make that much sense, but something like the 50 Fathoms that I own a 50 Fathoms. It is a beautiful watch, but I don't wear it very often. Number one, it's pretty delicate because it is a watch from the 1950s. And then, of course, it is filled with radium, which is radioactive. So there you go. I don't wear it very often. I would buy a Tourneck Rayville because they are extremely rare. No one has them. There were very, very few made. And they are basically a 50 Fathoms that were rebranded for the American brand Tourneck Rayville. It's a very rare watch. They were used by the US Army. Just a really, really cool watch that is extremely rare, and they go for, you know, $100,000 plus. Again, if I were a billionaire, I would have one in my collection. Again, another watch that is basically unavailable, the Bulova mill ships. These are all the originals that I'm talking about, not the reissues. So there are plenty of reissues out there of the Bulova mill ships. Well, there's 2. And then there is a reissue of the Tourneck Rayville, but I'm talking about the originals here. The Bulova mill ships, a watch that was actually never made. It was meant to sort of compete against the 50 Fathoms. Again, another watch that had radium, but I would love to own one of these. There are basically none of them out there. I think only 7 or 14, something crazy like that actually still exist. I think originally only 50 were made. A bunch of them were destroyed. There is one collector that has a bunch of them. They are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But again, if I were a billionaire, it really wouldn't matter. I would definitely own at least one of these. The next watch on this list is the Breguet Type 20, the original pilot's watch that was commissioned by the French Air Force. These are incredibly good looking watches. I want a dual register version, not a civilian version. I want a military version. And of course, these are vintage and very expensive. You can get other versions. Aran made one and a few other brands made Type 20s. I want a Breguet because obviously it's a Breguet, and if I'm a billionaire, I might as well go all out. They made reissues of these recently, which look really great. They definitely look the part, but still I would want a vintage version. Although they have radium in them, I believe they have radium in them, I would definitely want one. I would just keep it, you know, aside, and I wouldn't wear it very often, especially around my kids. But I would definitely buy one if I were a multi-billionaire. Yes, there are 2 Bulovas on this Grail watch list. You guys know I love Bulova. I would want a lunar pilot, and I would want a very specific lunar pilot that sold for $1.65 million at auction. It is the one that was worn by David Scott on the moon. When his Speedmaster failed, he used his personal watch, which is a watch that Bulova gave him. They were trying to replace the Speedmaster with their own watch, the lunar pilot. It didn't work out. He had his watch on him, so he wore it on the moon. I would want to buy that watch, that exact watch, because if I was a multi-billionaire, I would just go to the person who owns it and offer them double what they paid for it, and maybe they would sell it to me, and that would be it. I would own a watch that physically was on the moon, and I think that would be pretty incredible. Okay, so now a couple of modern watches. De Bethune make a pretty incredible watch. It's called the Dream Watch. It looks like a wedge. It's very inspired by spaceships. It's a jump hour. I believe it's a tourbillon. It goes for $500,000. So it's a very, very expensive watch. The one that I like is the heat blued titanium. So it's a heat blued titanium. It looks like a blue wedge thing that belongs on Star Trek on your wrist. It's very out there, very crazy. But when you're talking about crazy watches, I think this is probably one of the most interesting looking crazy watches that you can buy. I think it blows something like an RM out of the water. It's beautiful, it's a sculpture, and it's also really well made. And if I were a billionaire, I would own at least one of these. Next is probably, I think, probably the cheapest watch on this list, because these do resell for around $40,000, which is, you know, a lot of money, but it is a Laurent Ferrier. It's a traveler's watch. So it's their GMT watch with the globe on the dial. Basically, there's a US limited edition that I really like. I live in the US, so that makes sense. And it's an enameled dial. It's gorgeous. Laurent Ferrier makes some of the highest quality watches in the world, period. And they're extremely, extremely beautiful, in my opinion. So if I did have all the money in the world, I would own at least one Laurent Ferrier, and that one would be the Traveler, the US limited edition. Last but not least, we have another $500,000 watch, and this is an Omega. It's a Speedmaster. Now, you might be thinking, a watch that went to the moon? No, we already have that covered in the collection. I'm not looking for one of those. What I'm looking for is the Chrono Chime. The Chrono Chime is a Speedmaster, minute repeater, crazy looking, solid gold watch on a gold bracelet. This is a big chunk of gold with a very complicated movement. In fact, Omega say it's their most complicated movement they ever made. It's a beautiful watch, very interesting looking, lots of crazy details on it. And of course, if I'm a billionaire, I would own at least one of these watches. And that's really it. That's my list. Tell me what you guys think down in the comments below. This doesn't have to be Grail watches. These are like pie in the sky watches. The list of watches that I just spoke about here represents millions and millions of dollars in watches. And obviously you have to be a billionaire to be able to spend millions of dollars on a watch collection. And then of course, if you were actually a collector, you would continue to collect. So you would end up spending millions upon millions of dollars on a watch collection. And if I was a billionaire, I would be doing that. However, I'm barely a thousandaire, so I stick in my lane. But tell me what you guys think about the watches that I picked. Also, down in the comments, add a list of the watches that you would choose if you were a billionaire tomorrow and you decided that you were a watch collector like Mark Zuckerberg did. Would you buy the same watches that he did? I really do respect him for the watches that he purchased. Like I said, he didn't go out and just buy a bunch of Rolexes and APs and Patek Philippe's and maybe an RM. That's not what he did. He went out and bought some amazing watches that he finds attractive. And that's what collecting is all about. And I think he's going about it the right way. Tell me what you guys think. Do you not like what Mark is doing with his collection? You could also tell me that in the comment section down below. Anyway guys, thank you for logging on. Thank you for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. I will catch you guys in the next video.